which I noticed when he crouched down to hammer in the nails. He also sported long sideburns, which both of my brothers would later imitate. He taught me how to swing a hammer properly, install joists, hang wallpaper, and decorate. After completing the conversion, I shared an attic room with Bill, who was 6 years my junior. With such a big age difference, we pretty much went our own separate ways, although I did ensure that the local bullies never picked on him when we played in the street. Bill was small and skinny, and often hid behind Mother's dress. Rhoda shared a room downstairs with Auntie Dossie. Doug, as the eldest, enjoyed the largest attic room all to himself, something that was a source of constant irritation to me. Doug was clever and, like a number of such people, was rather lazy. He was very laid back and liked reading and music, both of which were much too sedate for me. He enjoyed cricket, and I teased him endlessly over its being a game for softies. Even though he was older than me and slightly taller, I used to goad him mercilessly. Softy, softy. I would taunt until he snapped. He would become so angry that he would launch himself after me with a ridiculous running action, all uncoordinated arms and legs, shouting, "I'm going to kill you!" But I was always too quick. I would bolt out of the house and run into our neighbour's house, right through their living room and kitchen, and out the back door to safety. The women all knew me and used to scream at me to get out, but they were never really too bothered. It was all part of the game. We all got along well in a caring community. Growing up, I was not exactly a bad child, but I was in trouble on a regular basis. Discipline at school was very strict. The teachers made liberal use of their attitude adjusters. Some used the cane, while others preferred the fearsome Lochgelly tawse, a thick 2- or 3-tailed leather strap named after the Fife mining village where it was produced, and which stung for hours after it struck your wrists. I got belted frequently for talking in class, but made sure I kept quiet about it when I got home to avoid further punishment. Father liked peace and quiet when he came home from work, and I was so full of energy that I used to drive him up the wall. I would run from room to room, mindlessly slamming doors or rushing past him and knocking his book off its perch. He was the disciplinarian whenever I got into trouble. He would never castigate me verbally. He would just methodically fetch his razor strop and track me down to wherever I was cowering. He would bare my backside and strap me, leaving stinging red marks. If it was a particularly dire offence, I would be sent to my room without dinner. He never shouted. I knew that if I did something wrong and he found out about it, he would punish me for it. Happily, most of the time, Mum and Auntie Dossie shielded my behaviour from him. While us kids were at school and Dad at work, the house was left to the sisters. Dossie did the housework while Mum did the cooking. She was a great cook, and the kitchen was very much her domain. Cooking smells would emanate from it all day, and pots would bubble constantly on the stove. I can never actually remember entering the kitchen in the daytime, and her not being there. My mother, Gertrude, was the best mother I could ever have had. Mum was slightly taller than Dad, around 5 feet 8 inches, with a slim build and dark brown eyes and hair that she always wore in buns on each side of her head. She had a great sense of humour and was a terrific conversationalist. Mum's parents were quite well-to-do. Her father was a sales representative for a big London firm, and she had attended Albin School, a private establishment in Aberdeen, where they had lived in Hamilton Terrace in the posh West End of town. She was also very musical and was a great pianist, just like my brother Doug. Auntie Dossie was musical too, and a marvellous singer. On special occasions we would all gather around the piano in the lounge for a sing-song. Mum was a real Scottish cook. Nothing went to waste, and every penny was a prisoner. The Scots have a reputation for thriftiness, but most of them would defer to Aberdonians when it comes to frugality. Hearty soups and broths, mince and tatties, dough balls, stovies, pies, crumbles and steam puddings were conjured up from her tight budget. People used to love visiting our house. Aside from the great food, Mum was a wonderful host. Most of the day she went around the house without her teeth in, but as soon as the doorbell rang there would be a frantic scramble to find her gnashers and pop them in, much to our mirth. She had a bubbly personality and a deeply caring side that made her aware of everyone's existence. She always ensured the conversation flowed and involved everyone. Even when she was serving food or stirring pots, she would be engaging with people and making them laugh. She was never flustered. While she had her own opinions, and would fight to make them heard, she never spoke ill of anyone. Placid and calm, Mum was the polar opposite of her sister, yet they complemented each other so well. They were always in high spirits when together, and kept the house full of warmth and love. Rhoda took after Mother in all respects. She was like a miniature version of Mum, and very much a girly girl who loved her dolls and pretty dresses, make-believe and tea parties. She steered well clear of Doug and me, especially when we were up to our rough games. Auntie Dossie was a very bonny woman, but had never married and always lived with us. She was diminutive, barely touching 5 feet tall, and walked with a slight stoop. Her extraordinary shock of grey hair was the only hint that she was no ordinary person. There were times when she was more Dotty than Dossie. She was splendidly eccentric, great with us children, and we all loved her. She did have one boyfriend, but after a while she ended the relationship, explaining to my mother, "He's got very hairy legs. I couldn't possibly marry him." Sometimes Dossie did things without first engaging the brain, and nothing could encourage her to change gear. She constantly had a cheap woodbine cigarette hanging from her mouth, even when doing the housework. The thin, white fags would stick to her bottom lip, and she'd natter and dust without ever removing the cigarette. She lit the next smoke with her last one, but she never smoked in front of the fire. Dad objected to the smell, and she respected that. Dossie also had the habit of rubbing her leg mindlessly while sitting in front of the fire. On one occasion, while Mum, Dossie and Dad were sitting at the fire, she was rubbing away at her leg, the action becoming ever more furious. Dossie, who always sat between Mum and Dad, turned to Mother and said, "Gertie, I've no feeling in my leg." Mum replied, "You idiot, that's my leg you're rubbing." They were always laughing hilariously and prattled on forever. But sometimes Mum was the absent-minded one. On one frosty winter morning, the day that the bin men collected the rubbish, Mum told Dossie that she was going to take the bin from the back door out to the street to be emptied. She went out, bracing herself against the chill, walked down the side path and handed it to the bin man. Back in the house, she shivered and said to Dossie, "It's awfully cold out there today, Doss." "No wonder," Dossie roared with laughter. "You haven't got your skirt on." At the realization that she had shown her bloomers in all their glory to the bin man, Mum rushed to her room, suffering equal measures of embarrassment and amusement. All of the kids in our street used to gather on the piece of grass down from our house to play football and cricket. During the lichty nichts, the long summer evenings of northern Scotland, we could play for hours after dinner, and my parents had a job getting me inside. Auntie Dossie would have to come out and shout us in. By contrast, the winters in Aberdeen were long, dark, frosty and bitter, trapping us indoors all evening. I was never one to sit and read a book, and always had to have something to do with my feet or hands. I think that is why Mum gave me the job of collecting the messages from the cooperative. There was no pre-packaging, and everything was made up to order. When you bought butter, for instance, whoever was working behind the counter would take it out and pat a golden yellow lump into a rectangle and wrap it in brown paper. All of the rice, tea, coffee, barley, lentils and things were taken out of sacks, weighed and put into paper bags. I used to love their bread. It was pan-baked and would have crusts on 5 of 6 sides. The 6th side would be white bread. On my walk back home, I would pick at the warm bread and scoff it down, hoping Mum wouldn't notice. The shop assistants in their yellow aprons were always nice, especially to us kids. There was great banter, but they looked out for us, making sure our change was firmly in our grasp before we left, saying sternly, "Now go straight home, no dawdling." 80 years later, I can still remember our co-op number, 28915. I would get sent down to buy our food, bread, milk, everything really. We had to quote that number every time we bought something. Every year there was a dividend that was paid out. The payment amounted to 2 shillings and 6pence in the pound, so it accumulated quite well. It arrived just before we broke off for the 6-week summer school holidays, and Mum would buy us a pair of leather sandals and a pair of khaki shorts, which had to last all summer. We used to slide down rocks at the beach, exploring caves, climbing trees, and when we ripped them or tore holes in them, it was a case of tough luck. I spent most of my summers wearing tattered and torn shorts. I earned my pocket money by going for the groceries. Every Saturday, Mum would pay me the princely sum of a penny, which after much deliberation I duly spent at the local sweetie shop, a sparkling Aladdin's cave boasting shelves groaning with row upon row of gleaming glass jars proudly announcing their sugar